Warren Davis with the Village Network, talking to you about the VAR initiative today. Again, Warren Davis with the Village Network. You're watching TVN on CAN TV, and we're here to talk to you about the VAR initiative. First of all, the Village Network is a non-for-profit that is really geared towards showing folks how they can revitalize communities as it pertains to the homestead. We have a strong emphasis on the consumer renovation programs. These programs are mortgages that allow you to purchase or finance and allow all or part of the money to be used for renovation of the home. It can be used for both investment properties and properties that you own, and goes up to a 4-unit building. So the interesting thing that I'm going to talk to you today is how these programs actually work, and a discovery that we made as it pertains to these programs that basically stands to change everything relative to how people see revitalization as it pertains to the homestead. And it's really significantly to address property values. The consumer renovation programs such as FHA 203K, and I'll just pull that up. So if I go to, actually let me take a step back, go to here, Chicago Housing Expo, renovate a home, and then we can click on FHA 203K. Now, FHA 203K is a rehabilitation mortgage, and I'll read what it says. The Section 203K program is FHA's primary program for the rehabilitation and repair of single-family properties. As such, it is an important tool for community and neighborhood revitalization, as well as expanding home ownership opportunities. Now, I'm reading that because FHA's program is geared towards revitalizing communities and neighborhoods. And it does that by raising property values. Now, interestingly enough, it only raises the property value of the person using it. It actually does nothing for the community and the neighborhood around it, because it actually lowers property values to anyone else. And for anyone watching this, lenders, realtors, politicians, the question would be, well, why is that? Why does this government program designed for community and neighborhood revitalization actually lower property values when used on a purchase? Well, the reason is because values come from properties that sold within the past 6 to 12 months within a half mile to a mile of the subject property. So if you're trying to determine what your property value is, that's a big misunderstanding by a lot of people. They think that if they beautify their homes, if they fix up their homes, it's automatically going to be worth more. Well, actually, that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that when an appraiser, the person comes out to determine your property value, or if a realtor is looking to get a sense as to what your property value is, what are they going to look for are recent sales, comparable properties to the property that we're trying to determine the value. And those sales, they call them comparables or comps for short. Now, lenders, mortgage lenders, want to have 3 of these comps within a half mile to a mile of your property if you're looking for your value, and within that sold, not that are for sale, but sold within within the past 6 to 12 months. So what happens if a comp or a comparable is more than 12 months old? Well, basically at that point it's somewhat unusable. It can be used, but only in extenuating circumstances. For the most part, if there are no sales, guess what? There's no value. So comparables, or property selling in a community, is very important. So the value comes from comps, and they have to be what? 6 months to a year, half a mile to a mile. When you have a sale, which means someone purchases the property for, say, $200,000, when it closes, that becomes a sale as of the date it closed. 6 to 12 months later, that comparable is, for many mortgage companies, no longer usable because it is too old. So I call this a property value engine. We have to keep it moving, which is very important to understand. So if you do a renovation loan, what you bought it for, say you bought it for $30,000 and you're going to fix it up to, you're going to put an additional $450,000 or $400,000 into it. So now it's going to appraise out for $450,000. That is the hope. And what the reality is that when you use a renovation loan, the value that it will appraise out for is different from the value that it will contribute to the community. Why? Because realtors on a purchase only record the purchase price. We record what they bought it for, in this case the $30,000, not the $450,000 that it's worth, not the $450,000 that they have as a mortgage, not the payment that would go with that mortgage. What's actually being recorded on what's called the multiple listing service, which is what realtors record, the database that realtors use to house all the properties that are for sale and sold. What records there is the $30,000 purchase price. It's also incidentally what the realtor gets paid on, the value of that $30,000. They get a small percentage of that. So that's a problem, because here a person bought a property for $30,000. They put $400,000 into it. And that's really bad numbers. I should really say more like $350,000 into it, because these loans, they cap out at about $400,000. So they bought it for $30,000. They put $350,000 into it. So now they're total in $380,000. It got appraised for $450,000. So the appraiser said, it's worth even more than what they owe. But what gets recorded is the $30,000 purchase price. So to symbolize this, if I go back to this, if I click on the home of our website and I click on the white paper, what you'll see are two homes there, what it is and what it's worth. Now people say, well, when they pick up my paper, our white paper, and we're going to talk about what this white paper is about in a minute, but they say, why do you have what it is and what it's worth as the property that looks like it started with? It kind of looks like it's backwards. The reason that's there is because what it is that's how it is today, but what it's worth is what they bought it for. In this case, say they bought it for $30,000. So that's just symbolically showing the reality of what happens when you use a renovation program on a purchase. Now, if I go back to HUD's website, and interestingly enough, I keep losing that site, but interestingly enough, if I go back to their site, it says the FHA 203K is the primary program for the rehabilitation of single-family homes. And as such, it is an important tool for community and neighborhood revitalization. But wait, you say, how is that so if the only thing that gets recorded is the $30,000 what they bought it for? It actually lowers property values. Now, we all know that foreclosures bring property values down. Why? Because they're sold at a much, much lower number than probably even that it's worth. Right? So now that brings your property values down, because when you look at your sales in your area, they are lower because of the foreclosures. So, let's summarize. The FHA 203K lowers property values on a purchase. For the person using it, oddly enough, they bought, say, for $30,000, they put $350,000 in it, where they have a payment based on that $380,000. They have a mortgage, but their property got appraised out for $450,000. But to the person next door who wants to now refinance their property, and they need value, they're going to look at the value for the property next door, and they're going to see, wow, it's beautiful. But guess what? It's only worth what they bought it for. That's a problem. And it is addressed in our white paper. Our white paper says, why? Is there something different about this appraised value versus an appraised value on a purchase? Well, someone say, well, if they bought it for $450,000, then that's what they were willing to pay for it. How is that different from the person that has the same mortgage, the same $450,000 mortgage, but they bought it for $30,000? Is it any different for them than the person that bought it for the whole $450,000? Not at all. So that is a correction that needs to happen. So how could you fix that? How could you make it work? Well, it's actually very simple, and we point this out in our white paper. All they have to do is, when the work is complete, record what it actually appraised for, because now that's what it's worth. Simple, right? You would think. But making that change is a bit of a challenge. Why is it a challenge? Because it just makes sense, right? It's a challenge because, first of all, HUD apparently doesn't move that nimbly. They need a lot of people to come and say, hey, this needs to be fixed. Because let's think about it. What we are recommending is that more people are become aware of these consumer renovation programs, that they be aware that they can refinance into their home and use the future value, because that's how they work. They tap into your future value today. You get funded based on what it's going to be worth, not what it is right now. So let's forget about the purchase market for a moment. Let's think about the people that own their homes. The average home in the United States was built before 1969. The average home in Chicago is over 100 years old. If you're not maintaining a home, it falls apart. It's like anything else. Anything that we look at that we say is infrastructure in this country, it's because these items have not been maintained appropriately, so now they're becoming a danger. Like bridges, for example. We're known to have a problem with our bridges across this country, so we have to repair them. We have to maintain these bridges, otherwise they're dangerous. Well, if you're in a home and you haven't maintained it for years, then it becomes basically a danger, if nothing more, to nature, because it's inefficient. Old furnace, old windows, doors, infrastructure is falling apart. So homes are one of the largest amount of assets that we have in this country. Everyone's got to live somewhere. And if these homes are not properly maintained, then they really become a part of our infrastructure problem. But you never hear about homesteads when it comes to addressing infrastructure, because there's just way too many of them. But what if people could find out that they could actually get the money, not based on what it is today, the old, inefficient, rundown home that you've been living in for 20 years, but a home that could literally be just like those flipped homes and be made new again. They could get the money based on what it's going to be worth. That is actually huge, because that says that the renovation programs are as HUD defined them. They're a primary program for the rehabilitation of single families. And if you fixed how they work and let them become actually the value that they should be, then we would actually be not only restoring homesteads across the country, we would be restoring property values. Now, more importantly, you remember I said that these comps, they're only good for 6 to 12 months, and they have to be within a half mile to a mile, but they basically have the time is running out for them. They have a time stamp. They have a shelf life. That's a good way of putting it. And they're only good for 6 to 12 months. So if there are no new sales, then we could run out of comps and consequently run out of value. But if this were fixed and someone could refinance their home into this mortgage and create a new comp when they do so. Now, granted, we need at least one sale to maintain marketability, but the other two could be refinances where they were actually appraised out for the value that they were going to be. They were funded based on what the value that they were going to be. And now when the work is done, we should be able to recognize these properties as comparables, as comps from the day that they closed. Now, if people understood this very simple formula, if we could have a sale in an area, let people know that there's value that they can tap into, then when they do it, they also create a comparable when they refinance and create value, then the next person not far from them could do the same thing. And it'd be like throwing a pebble into the water and watching it spread. I do believe that's what we call neighborhood revitalization, but as pertained to the homestead. But typically when it comes to neighborhood revitalization, where does that money come from? Typically it comes from government, our tax dollars. This neighborhood revitalization, this money comes from the private sector banks. they are given the money to revitalize these homes. That money will never run out. People just have to know it's there. Now, they can go out and buy a new car, take on a $500 payment on what we call a depreciating asset, because everyone knows if you drive it off the lot, it's worth less. But if you put that same $500 at today's rates into a home, that equates to over $100,000. That's a lot can be done with that. Now, if you HGTV fans, when that designer says, hey, what's your budget? You do this, you can say, well, I have $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 budget. And that's huge. You can refinance the mortgage you have now that's probably associated with an old home, inefficient home, somewhat run down, doesn't look the way it did certainly when you bought it, and you wish it could be new again. But it can be, and when it is, it's not going to only be worth more. It's going to be worth what you owe on it. And your neighbors cannot tap into it. So all we have to do is pass this information. We got to say, hey, value over here, value over there, value over there, and let people know that they can tap into those values today and revitalize their homes with a renovation program, a consumer renovation program. That is significant. So if you're an alderman, listen to this. That is actually neighborhood revitalization with a focus on the homestead, but using funds from the private sector banks. And the programs that they're using are government, HUD and Fannie Mae. How can you lose? Let your people know. We're actually working with several aldermen in the Chicago area to do bring the Chicago Housing Expo to the various wards throughout the city. And we will do that all around, and we'll let people know that this is available. Because by doing so, you can not just revitalize the inside of the home, you can revitalize the outside of the home. And we know that if you do that and you beautify the home and bring up its value, then one thing is going to happen, that the folks that shouldn't be hanging around will probably move to the areas that they're more comfortable, where things are a little more dingy, not beautiful, and revitalized. Because you can use this for landscaping also. Now, my wife and I, we're revitalizing a home in South Shore. Yes, unfortunately, we used it on a purchase, and yes, we use a consumer renovation program, and yes, we're going to live there. So consequently, as a result, we lowered the property values of our neighbors. That's unfortunate, that's disappointing. But if the VAR initiative takes off, as I believe it will, then what we will have is this. And this comes from Julia Stash. She's president of the John D. Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, one of the largest philanthropists in the world. Julia said, VAR, which stands for Value After Renovation. That is the value after a property has been revitalized, the value after rehabilitation, VAR. VAR is indeed intriguing and especially interesting because it brings into mix resources that are not constrained. What resources are constrained? Our tax dollars when it comes to neighborhood revitalization. They're constrained. By the time we get TIF dollars out there and spread it across all these wards in Chicago, for example, we'd be lucky to get a park bench on the south side sometimes, I think. So the money doesn't go too far. Anyway, resources, government dollars, our tax dollars are not constrained in their ability to be put to use for neighborhood revitalization. Go, Julia. That's an awesome quote. So, at the end of the day, what we are basically suggesting, and you can go out to the villagenetwork.org, villagenetwork.org, and pull up this white paper and read it. You're going to hear about how homes are in a state where this is the key to neighborhood revitalization as it pertains to the homestead. And the opportunity is significant. There are a lot of people out there that are in homes that are run down. They have leaking roofs. But here they are in a brand new car. Why? Because they could get the money. What if they could get the money to revitalize the home instead of buying the car? It's interesting enough, you can go buy the car afterwards, but you can't do it the other way around. So if you buy the car first, you're probably in a position where you can't afford to revitalize the home. Even though the numbers say you could, you can't. You may not be able to. So it's good to take advantage of this first, revitalize your homestead, and then go buy the car. So at the end of the day, the consumer renovation programs, CRPs, these are the key to neighborhood revitalization as it pertains to the homestead. All we have to do is let people know that they exist. So what happens when people find out that they can get this money? Well, they're going to use it. And the interesting part about it, you don't have to know anything about construction. Why? Because we can help you connect with our partner, which is Shore Partners, and they will connect you to a designer. That's right, your very own designer, which is going to be included in the loan. And that designer is going to come out to your home and they're going to look at what it is you want to do. They're going to say, what are your must-haves? Just like an HGTV, right? They're going to say, what are your must-haves? And you're going to say, well, I must have an extra bathroom. I must have an ensuite. I must have my basement finished. I must have new windows, new doors, new furnace. You know what? $100,000 can go a long way if that's what you can qualify for. And because it's in a 30-year mortgage, the payment is going to be under control. And you can't get any more than you can afford, which is very important to understand. You cannot get any more than you can afford. So yes, the designer now is going to come in and tell you and advise you on what can be done to renovate your home. The designer will do just as you see on HGTV. The only thing you need is a budget. So give us a call at the Village Network. Log on to villagenetwork.org. Give us a call and email us, and we'll tell you how you can do this too. If you're an alderman, let's talk. We need to bring this to your constituents. If you're the mayor of Chicago, Mr. Emanuel, this is the key to revitalize homesteads throughout Chicago. If you're the governor, this is the key to revitalize homesteads in your state. If you're Mr. President, this is the key to revitalize homesteads in our country. Neighborhood revitalization focused on a homestead using funds from the private sector banks. Have we not been looking for a partnership where the private sector can contribute towards our country in a positive way? Everyone makes money here. But the benefit is to the homeowner, to come home to a home that is new again. Someone's probably thinking, well, if I'm going to do a whole house renovation, where am I going to stay while the work is being done? Get this, you can put up to 6 months mortgage payments into the loan. 6 months. So you can revitalize and have a place to stay while the work is being done. How sweet is that? So the key to neighborhood revitalization is to be informed, to coalesce, as a result, be empowered, as the words behind me so well said by my wife. Be informed, coalesce, and be empowered. All you community organizations, this is the key. We've been looking for the answer to revitalize homesteads for years. This is it, and it's been under our noses for decades. So please, do some research. Contact us. Reach out to your alderman, to your community leaders. We want to bring this to you. We want to bring a housing expo to your area, Chicago Housing Expo. Why? Because at the end of the day, if we can live better at home, then that is what it's all about. We can renovate and can revitalize, and we can live better at home. So I just want to wrap up and say that the FHA 203K, Fannie Mae Homestyle, which is the other one, these consumer renovation programs on a purchase lower property values. The VAR initiative, the Value After Rehabilitation Initiative, which can be found at villagenetwork.org, that white paper can be found there, will tell you how we can fix this and how these programs can not just lower property values, but could contribute towards helping property values to the surrounding communities from which they're used. So again, the VAR initiative, remember that. The Consumer Renovation Programs, remember that name also. And remember the Village Network, and this is Warren Davis giving you all the insights you need so you can learn how you can revitalize your homestead, how you can revitalize your communities, how we can revitalize our country as it pertains to the largest number of assets that we have, that being the homes. This is the solution. This is the answer. This is Warren Davis with the Village Network signing off. We look forward to connecting with you, and we look forward to talking about this more next week, next Monday. Tune in, tell your friends, tune in to CAN TV at 6 p.m. next Monday and learn all about the VAR initiative and the Village Network and our local housing expos. Thank you and good night.